As far as the goal of imaginal work, as I understand it, when we talk about the idea of the unconscious, the word gets used in different ways, obviously. Kind of the immediate thought usually is stuff that we're just not aware of at all. We can be ego aware or consciously aware. And so to be consciously aware is to be conscious of. So the word unconscious can mean we're not even aware of it, or it can mean aware of something, but it's still unconscious. And what is meant there is when you're conscious of something, you're directly conscious of the fact that you are not the thing you're being conscious of. Your selfhood isn't defined by or isn't the thing that you're being aware of. It's that whole ontology versus phenomenology thing. The idea with the imaginal realm is that this idea of possession, if you use that word, or which again, possession sounds more, is that word was used more when you're looking at imaginal forms as actual entities or spirits or things like that. If you look at them as energies, then it's that you are motivated by these energies. The shift from the mind being moved by, run by, motivated by these energies and or these spirits, archetypes is another word that gets used, and having the experience that is self, right? So it's subjective awareness or experiencing that energy, that spirit, that archetype as self. The shift that gets made, if there's a successful imaginal work happening, is that you become conscious of that thing objectively. So there's a shift from imaginal experience going from subjective to objective. There's objective awareness of it, meaning the experience becomes object in your awareness. And you indeed realize that even in the kind of view where those are entities, those are spirits, etc., you become aware that indeed your subject, your actual self, is, for lack of a better word, bigger, more powerful than that thing that you were possessed by. That's the good news in it all, is you recognize that this horrible creature or this terrible monster or this wonderful king or warrior or whatever, you recognize, oh, that's not what I am. That's not who I am. That's a particular theme, a particular archetype, a particular spirit, a particular energy.
Do those come from within and from without? Or because just to distinguish the idea, you're saying that it shifts from being subjective to objective. Is it still an object within your own field? Or is it an object that is coming? Because I think it can be both, right? But just to say that you become aware of being possessed by something, but is that thing then available to you? And I think you'll probably get to this, but is it then still a part of you that is accessible, or do you see it as outside yourself?
Yeah, that was one of the big questions, and Carl Jung addressed that and coined the term the collective unconscious. He coined that term, but he came to that by studying all these cultures and traditions and practices that already existed, and recognized that it's indeed not an individual origin of this stuff. It's like our psyches are all tapped into the same water table, and we draw from this collective unconscious. So these archetypes are, to use the term from without, I mean, it's that strange thing that what you recognize, that one of the big insights is that there is no without. Our minds try to categorize and section off what is self and what is not self. And it's this tricky thing because I'm saying you recognize that the imaginal experience is not self, but simultaneously and paradoxically, you recognize it's all one giant psyche. It's all one. Ultimately, it's one thing, right? So the archetypal energy is emerging or arising in your awareness from the collective unconscious psyche into your particular individual mind. And then you are experiencing that archetype. But, the idea with labeling it that way and stuff is to recognize this isn't some unique quality to you. This is a unique quality to the collective world psyche that you happen to be, pulling up into your system. It's like, again, to try to force this computer analogy, it's like the internet isn't your internet any more than it's my internet. But you can download different stuff, than me. And so you can be operating, if we say that archetypes are like programs, or operating systems. Well, you may be running on a certain operating system. I may be running on a different operating system. And so we are having these different things go on, but we have the ability, I could tap into the same operating system you are, or vice versa. So again, this idea that our individual ego minds are just our hard drives. And in the same way that consciousness is beyond your particular hard drive, the imaginal realm, it's the same thing. And so the simple model would be consciousness is above, the imaginal realm is below. And one way I've tried to put it in a model is that if the individual human ego mind is your particular hard drive, you can get on the internet and that would be consciousness. Or if there was kind of an internet from below, let's say, that you upload stuff from, right? So, we have these flash drives and SD cards and stuff like that you can plug into your computer. It's like if from below we have stuff uploaded onto our hard drive, and then it's, oh my God, how do we deal with what's being uploaded? Do we have the capacity to tolerate it? Do we have the capacity to, organize it or deal with it? And the general idea is, no, we don't. Our hard drives don't. We need the cloud, right? We need the help of consciousness. We need the help of the internet in order to process and interpret and organize and deal with the stuff that's being uploaded, as well as just energetic capacity, if that was kind of analogous to storage capacity. It's like our hard drives don't have the energetic capacity. We don't have the storage capacity. What we need to do is stream it straight through. We cannot try to download this stuff. Downloading it would be analogous to identifying.
Yeah, there's a lot of good information there. I think we should come back to that, because there's, as far as like transmitting things and hidden viruses and all of these unsafe things that happen when you take on other people's data or data from an unknown location. The ability to process that, like you're saying, is limited. We don't have the ability to process that built in to a hard drive, to our ego, because that's not how it was ever meant to function. So I think there's good, the uploading part of that made a lot of sense. The other thing I wanted to ask just about what you were saying is understanding Imaginal from how you're describing it requires a perspective shift about what the self is and the interrelation of the self with others via the unconscious pool or water that you're talking about. A few of the things we've talked about require a shift of the definition of self, but this idea that our self is our collective selves are influenced by these collective archetypes is a pretty big jump.
So in trying to speak to that, back to your question about how does the dimension approach apply here, it's that jump that the dimension approach is just a way of trying to describe. The general idea in these various systems out there, Islamic mysticism, for example, the idea of the third eye, the idea of the conscious mind, it's that tool, it's that power that has the ability to see the truth, right? In Christian mysticism, same thing. That leap from being entangled, being possessed, being overcome by, being terrified of imaginal experience, it is the conscious self, it is the third eye, it is the conscious mind that has the ability to see that not only is that not self, but that imaginal experience is not more powerful than you. And that's where awakening comes into it. You know, that awakening involves an opening of the third eye. It involves becoming conscious. It involves becoming conscious as consciousness. And from that perspective, if you will, even though the word perspective is
from that aperspectival perspective.
Yes, thank you. You can see that. And that's what it all comes down to. And again, that's this idea that where I'm trying to put words to it, it's that when I had these awakening experiences where I became more aware, more conscious from there and of that, and as that, I started to be able to see much more clearly what's going on and see these interrelationships between the physical, the mental, the emotional, the subtle, and the imaginal, and started to see that, as I keep saying over and over again, the most effective, potent, powerful, technique, if you will, or methodology with any of that stuff is to just shine the conscious mind on it, and then stay with the process that naturally happens, which is that initially there's witnessing and then holding and then containment and mirroring and contact. That's what happens. And that's what everyone is struggling to do every moment of every day. And so, like in Buddhism, it's mindfulness. That conscious mind organ, if you will, has the ability not only to see the truth, but to affect these other realms. So then the way I put it is, if I'm orienting from my conscious mind and I'm looking at meaning being conscious of someone's fascial tissue, the fascial tissue starts changing. And so I'm doing physical work. If I'm sitting and talking with someone and they're expressing mental concepts and stuff, and if I sit and hold a conscious space for their mental experience, I'm doing mental work. If I'm being consciously aware of their subtle energetic field and holding space for that, then I'm doing subtle energetic work. And so when it comes to Imaginal, it's the same thing. If I'm holding conscious attention, conscious awareness on what's going on in the imaginal realm of their psyche, then I'm doing Imaginal work. And then the shift to consciousness work, it's the same thing. It's that there's conscious attention being paid to consciousness. And so then it becomes consciousness work. And the result, if the result of Imaginal work is to make the subjective experience in the Imaginal become objective, the goal of consciousness work is initially actualization. And I'm using that term to mean becoming conscious of consciousness work, and eventually realization, which is becoming conscious as consciousness. So consciousness work, the goal is to have consciousness become subject, because the idea here, obviously, is that the true subject is consciousness. The true subject is not your imaginal experience. It's not your subtle experience. It's not your thoughts. It's not your body. The true subject is your consciousness. And again, anytime any of us are looking with our conscious minds, because we all are doing this some of the time. And again, we're all doing it to some degree all the time. It's just that the more we do it at any given moment, the more conscious space is created for these experiences. And, we're all identified and entangled in all these realms. But little by little, we move through certain ways we're entangled, certain ways we're identified, certain ways we're caught and lost in these different realms. And we are, like, to use the shamanic model, we're reclaiming these little parts of our soul. If you say that consciousness is soul, it's the soul is the entity that is consciousness. We're reclaiming these pieces, if you will, of our soul that were entangled in this or that realm, this or that dimension, and bringing them out of that realm and back into their rightful place in the conscious.
I think that's a powerful way of describing it. Do you have an example of what that looks like? This idea of reclaiming a part of the soul?
I guess if I was going to try to speak to that, we've all had experiences where we felt possessed, we felt lost, we felt a lack of self, we felt like we weren't ourselves, and then something happens, some kind of shift, some kind of healing, some kind of awakening, and there's a light that comes on again. There's a feeling of selfhood, a feeling of safety, a feeling of power, a feeling of freedom. And not just that feeling, but more importantly, those feelings, that freedom, that lightness, that selfhood, in relation to the thing that we had previously been so afraid of, so overpowered by, so possessed by. The relationship shifts. We find self in the midst of that experience that we previously could not find self in. That's the big distinction, right? Because you can have a state shift where you're lost in a certain part of yourself, but then you come out of it and you're back to being more in your conscious self. And we all see this in others. You have your good friend where you feel this conscious presence with and this connection with them, but you bring up politics, for example, and suddenly from your perspective, you see your friend go unconscious, and they seem to shift into some other part of their psyche where it's like, where did the conscious being that I thought I was talking to go? And now they're spouting all these concepts that I can't believe they really believe, and simultaneously your friend's thinking the same thing about you. And then boom, you come back out of that and you're back to being friends again. Again, we all know that experience in others, and really, I think we all know that we ourselves do that. And so again, to start making that distinction between when am I conscious and when am I possessed by an idea? When am I possessed by an energy? When am I possessed by an urge or a drive or an instinct or a spirit or whatever you want to call it? And when am I more conscious? Is a practice in itself. And there's a difference between jumping the split, so to speak, from an unconscious part of your psyche to a conscious part of your psyche. That's different than, can you become conscious in a part of your psyche that you previously weren't?
You describe the issue or the challenge of it, because if you're unconscious of the dynamic you're talking about, what you just said sounds like everyone who disagrees with me is possessed, which is what I believe when I'm possessed.
Yeah, when we're possessed, that just seems like the truth. And of course, the idea of, well, what is the truth? My understanding of the Christian tradition, that Jesus was saying, I am. He was directly, openly saying, I'm the truth and the light and the way. I'm conscious. And you guys need to become conscious also. And not only am I hooked up to consciousness, or not only am I streaming consciousness, the big shift from I am my hard drive, but I'm hooked up to this thing called the internet, and none of you guys are hooked up to the internet because you don't even know what it is yet. It's I am the internet, I am consciousness. And of course, it's like, what in the world does that mean,
Right, because the tough thing is to use the word I to describe something that's much bigger than I. But the I that he says, the subject of I am the truth, is the same subject that spoke the universe into existence, right? It's the trans-rational, outside of time I.
And so by the same idea of the imaginal being a collective unconsciousness, it's a collective consciousness. So this experience of a separate I is really just, at the hard drive level. It's just at the ego level. Prior to that, it was, below that, in that simple vertical model, there was no self. And again, in history, this is, it correlates, and in an individual's lifespan, it correlates. The child doesn't have much of a sense of an individual separate self. They're just merged with mother, and they're merged with family, and they're merged with their environment, and there's this developmental process where they become more and more aware of of these certain kinds of separateness, and then somewhere around adolescence, the general idea is they arrive at an exciting and terrifying sense of individuality, and they become an individual person, individual self, and they feel a certain liberation from the confines of all the stuff they were merged with prior to that. But of course, these ideas are in psychology and with regard to the imaginal realm and stuff. The general idea is that it's a hoax, that we're not as free of all this stuff from below, so to speak, as we thought we were. We're still highly influenced by this collective unconscious experience, and by the same token, transpersonal experience is a movement back towards a collective again. It's a back towards unity, but a different type of collective.
Yeah, one that consciously incorporates these things that were previously separated from unconsciously.
Again, this experience of being able to start to actually discern consciousness is what's so...
Break that down. If you can give a tutorial on that, that would be great.
Yeah, basically there it was. How did you like it?
Nailed it. Really, it spoke to me.
It's one of those things where the truth of it is like words fail, right? Because it's literally not a rational, not a conceptual, not a logical thing. It's not a thing. But in an attempt to try to point to it or describe it, consciousness is this qualitatively different experience that leaves the ego mind, leaves the rational mind dumbfounded. It's just not. It can't grasp it. It can't look directly at it. Again, if you say the conscious mind is like the sun, you can't. The sun is beyond our grasp, right? We recognize that, okay, we can turn on the lamp or we can light the candle and experience light and stuff. But the sun seems to be this thing that is far beyond our control. And you can't even look directly at it, right? It's harmful to your eyes. It hurts your eyes. And it'll literally blind you if you do it too much. You have to surrender to it. You know what I mean? You like, if you're going to be at all in reality, you have to recognize that, like, you don't control the sun. The sun controls you. The sun is beyond you. The sun you live by the sun and its light that it gives. The conscious mind's like that. So the ego mind attempts to take over, it attempts to be more powerful than the sun, et cetera. But the analogy I'm just trying to make is it's like if you just recognize, look, you have eyeballs and you're seeing, it's kind of like we kind of feel like we shine light out of our eyeballs onto stuff and then we see it, right? And it's like, no, actually we receive light that the sun gave, whether it's directly or whether it's sunlight that's been converted, eventually to come through a lamp or something. But our eyeballs are actually receiving light that's bouncing off objects and going into our eyeballs. And if you get clear about that you aren't creating light and shining it out your eyes, it's the same way with the ego mind. It's like if you shift your perspective from I'm creating thoughts and I'm creating consciousness and I'm alive and I'm a self and I'm a being, if you get more real about it, meaning if that's your ego mind saying that, it's like, no, actually your conscious mind is the being and your conscious mind is shining light. And your ego mind ideally recognizes that it's receiving that light, receiving that consciousness, receiving that wisdom, receiving that experience of beingness. And when our ego mind actually does that, we feel the warmth of the sun. We feel the warmth of consciousness. We have this experience in our mind of it. And again, it's in the same way that you feel the warmth of the sun and you can see. You go from being blinded by darkness to being able to see the world around you because now the sun's shining on it. That doesn't mean you know the direct experience of the sun, but your mind and your body feel the effects of the sun, right? The experience in the mind of quote unquote knowing consciousness is feeling the warmth of consciousness. It's surrendering to and being receptive to consciousness as opposed to blocking consciousness out and fabricating a bunch of stuff ourselves. And so that's mindfulness, for example. Mindfulness, as I understand it, it's the mind's experience of that. The mind feeling this warm, you read the descriptions of what is a mindfulness state like. And it's like, well, there's this warmth and this goodness and this compassion and joyous thing. And it's like, well, that's how the mind feels when it's shined upon by consciousness and, received and registered as such. That's still not consciousness itself, right? That's an experience with a certain organ of consciousness. Just like when the sun warms your skin, that's an experience of the sun. So I understand consciousness like that.
If you want to learn more about the Dimension Approach, please visit dimensionapproach.com.